July 1969. Millions of people around the world were glued to their televisions, waiting for a moment that had never happened before. Humanity was about to attempt something extraordinary: landing on the moon. But this story had begun years earlier. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a fierce competition known as the space race. Each nation wanted to prove it possessed the most advanced technology on Earth. The Soviets scored several early victories, including launching the first satellite and sending the first human into space. The United States needed a response. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy announced an ambitious goal: to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the end of the decade. At the time, many experts thought it was impossible. But 8 years later, a mission called Apollo 11 was preparing to make history. To accomplish the mission, NASA selected 3 astronauts. Their names would soon become known around the world. And each had spent years training for one of the most complex missions ever attempted. On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launched from aboard the massive rocket. Thousands watched from the ground. Millions more followed the launch on television. As the rocket climbed into the sky, it carried not only 3 astronauts, but also the hopes of an entire nation. After reaching orbit around Earth, Apollo 11 began its journey toward the moon. For 4 days, the crew traveled through space, carefully monitoring every system aboard the spacecraft. There was no room for error. Ahead of them lay the most dangerous part of the mission: the lunar landing itself. And soon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would prepare to descend toward a world no human had ever walked upon. On July 20, 1969, Apollo 11 entered orbit around the moon. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin climbed into the lunar module, known as Eagle, and separated from the command module, where Michael Collins remained in orbit. As Eagle descended toward the lunar surface, problems began to appear. Computer alarms suddenly sounded inside the spacecraft. Fuel levels dropped dangerously low. Mission Control watched nervously as the seconds passed. For a moment, it seemed the landing might have to be aborted. But Armstrong remained calm. Taking partial manual control of the spacecraft, he guided Eagle away from a dangerous rocky area and searched for a safer landing spot. Then, with only seconds of fuel remaining, the message finally arrived. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Cheers erupted in Mission Control. For the first time in history, a human spacecraft had successfully landed on the moon. But the most famous moment of the mission was still to come. Several hours after landing, Neil Armstrong prepared to leave the lunar module. The entire world was watching. An estimated 600 million people followed the broadcast live, making it one of the most watched events in human history. Slowly, Armstrong descended the ladder of Eagle. Then, on July 20, 1969, he placed his left foot onto the lunar surface. At that moment, he spoke words that would become legendary. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Moments later, Buzz Aldrin joined him on the moon. Together, they became the first humans to walk on another world. The astronauts conducted experiments, collected lunar rocks and soil samples, and planted the American flag on the surface. They also left behind a plaque carrying a message from Earth. "We came in peace for all mankind." For a brief moment, humanity had achieved what once seemed impossible. But the mission was only halfway complete. The astronauts still had to make it back home safely. After spending more than 21 hours on the lunar surface, it was time to leave. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin climbed back into Eagle and prepared for one final challenge: the ascent from the moon. If the lunar module's engine failed to start, they would be stranded forever. There would be no rescue mission. No second chance. Millions watched anxiously as the countdown began. Then the engine ignited successfully. Eagle lifted off from the moon and began its climb back into orbit. Soon, Armstrong and Aldrin reunited with Michael Collins aboard the command module. Apollo 11 then began the long journey back to Earth. For 3 days, the crew traveled through space carrying lunar samples and the memories of a mission that had already changed history. On July 24, 1969, the spacecraft splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean. The astronauts were recovered by the United States Navy. The mission was complete. Humanity had reached the moon and returned safely home. But the impact of Apollo 11 was only beginning. The success of Apollo 11 changed the world forever. For the first time in history, humanity had set foot on another celestial body. What had once belonged only to science fiction had become reality. The mission proved that extraordinary goals could be achieved through innovation, determination and international scientific effort. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins became global icons. Their journey inspired millions of young people to pursue careers in science, engineering and space exploration. Apollo 11 also opened the door to future missions. In the years that followed, more astronauts would travel to the moon. expanding humanity's understanding of our nearest celestial neighbor. But no mission would ever carry the same sense of wonder as that first landing. More than 50 years later, the image of a human footprint on the lunar surface remains one of the most powerful symbols in history. A reminder of what humanity can achieve when it dares to explore the unknown. Because on that July night in 1969, 3 astronauts didn't just reach the moon. They changed mankind's view of what was possible forever.